Have you ever heard of the Celestial Railroad? Well, we're about to tell you a little bit of local history down here in South Florida. On July 4th, 1889, the Jupiter and Lake Worth Railway opened up to much fanfare, ferrying passengers and freight between Jupiter and Lake Worth, a 7.5-mile trip. Back then, you gotta remember, there really wasn't much down here as far as getting folks around. And what they did back then is a lot of steamers and ferries would bring folks down from Titusville down to Jupiter. Unfortunately, there wasn't a connection down to Lake Worth to take them down south to Palm Beach and areas further south like Miami. There was a 7.5-mile gap between Jupiter and Lake Worth that we had to fix. So the idea came up to build a railway. There were 4 stops along the route: Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and of course Juno. Mars and Venus were actually just a couple platforms, and the train did not stop there unless somebody was there waving. The town of Juno itself actually was not on the beach as it is today. Juno back then was at an area just to the east of PGA Boulevard, right where the 12 Oaks community is nowadays. The one-way ticket on the train was pretty pricey for the time, 10 cents per mile or 75 cents for the whole 7.5-mile journey. Unfortunately, the towns of Mars and Venus didn't make it. However, there was one resident in Venus at the time. His name was J.B. Wells. He lived there with 2 of his cats. Cats were named, of course, Jupiter and Juno. I'm sure you're wondering by now how the Celestial Railroad was nicknamed. Well, in a Harper's New Monthly magazine dated March of 1893, it was first mentioned by British writer Julian Ralph. Some interesting things I found out about the locomotive. Engineer Blue Reese, he would sit there and play Dixie on his whistle, on the actual steam whistle of the train, as the passengers would sing along as they would go along the path. Now, the train did run behind quite a bit because Blue, he would just stop and talk to anybody who would wave along the side of the road. And he would also rent out his dog, also named Blue, to local hunters, and he'd drop him off with the hunters, and then, on his return trip, he would pick up the dog on the way back, so he'd rent them so they'd go out and hunt with Blue. Also, we had the conductor, who's pretty noted, Captain Matheson, along with old Milton Messer. He's the one up front polishing the light. Since there was no place for the train to turn around, it would have to go backwards for the trip back from Juno back to Jupiter. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, why did it last only 6 years? Well, in 1893, Henry Flagler began using the Celestial Railroad to transport a lot of freight and a lot of supplies while he was building his Hotel Poinciana down in Palm Beach. He just figured it would be cheaper to buy the railroad, so when he actually put out an offer, they came back with a price so high, he just turned it down. And of course, according to history, Henry Flagler decided to bypass Jupiter and Juno with his Florida East Coast Railroad, virtually putting the Celestial Railroad out of business. Not much remains of the Celestial Railroad. There is some railroad spikes in museums. There is a small amount of track over there in Juno Beach, and there's a nice little exhibit over there at the museum that you can view some of the artifacts from the Celestial Railroad. This was such a neat story to pursue, and there's so many more things to it. I'm definitely going to have to post a few more. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you for watching our video. For more videos like this, hit subscribe and click the bell button below so you'll be notified of any new videos.